G'day, and welcome to a very special Christmas Eve edition of Strewth. Normally I'd jump right into the mysterious tales, but I wanted to start this week by explaining what this episode's all about. Slightly different structure. One of the things I've learnt this week is that telling spooky stories on Christmas Eve is a Victorian English tradition. So one of the many things that we've inherited that shape Australian Christmases, along with Christmas pudding, roast, crackers, Boxing Day cricket. But long before Christmas became all tinsel and shopping, the Victorians gathered around the fire on dark winter nights to tell tales of the uncanny and the unexplained. Charles Dickens, of course, made it famous with A Christmas Carol, but the tradition was much older and much wider than that one story. And it's a tradition that I wanted to honour in this episode. So over the past few months, as I've researched the cases that we've covered here on Strewth, I've collected dozens of first-hand accounts, witness statements, testimonies, personal experiences that didn't quite fit into the main episodes. Sometimes there's just not enough room, and sometimes they're a bit tangential to the central mystery. But these accounts are no less fascinating, and some of them I really loved. So in this episode, I'm going to present 3 of these accounts as fictionalised dramatisations based on real testimonies that I've picked up along the way. Real people describing their real experiences, but adapted here for the storytelling tradition that we're honouring. Because after all, you never want to let the truth get in the way of a good yarn. Firstly, there's a tale of a teacher who encountered something in the Victorian high country during a school hiking trip. And this one popped up during my research about the Button Man case, which is episode 8 if you haven't had a chance to listen to that one. The second is about a spiritualist who facilitated a séance and witnessed what he thought was communication from beyond. And this fell into my lap as part of the research about the Guyra poltergeist case, which was episode 10. And the third and final one is quite honestly one of the most bizarre but amazing things I've ever heard. And it comes from a character by the name of Bongo, who's called to a radio station about his experience in the Pilliga Scrub, has haunted anyone who listened to that radio broadcast for decades. This, of course, was from the Pilliga Princess research for episode 14, and I'll even put a link in the show notes to the original radio broadcast of his call-in. It's quite something. They're accounts based on real testimonies from people who saw something, experienced something, that they still struggle to explain years or even decades later. So find somewhere comfortable, pour yourself something cold, or indeed warm if you're listening from the Northern Hemisphere, and settle in for 3 accounts of the unexplainable, told by those who were there when the impossible became real. Story 1. The Thing in the Shed, as told by the teacher. I've been teaching for 35 years now, and I've taken hundreds of kids on school camps. Mountains, beaches, the outback, you name it. I've probably supervised a group of teenagers there. And after all that time, you develop a certain confidence. You know how to handle things like homesickness, minor injuries, the kid who forgot their sleeping bag. You think you've seen it all. But there's one trip I took back in the late 90s that I still can't explain. And believe me, I've tried. It was a 4-day hiking expedition in the Victorian high country with a group of Year 10 boys. 8 students, myself and another teacher. We'd planned the route months in advance, nothing too ambitious. Just a solid introduction to multi-day hiking. The weather forecast had looked perfect when we set out. But anyone who spent time in the high country knows how quickly conditions can change up there. We were only a day in when the rain started. It wasn't the gentle drizzle you can walk through. This was proper mountain rain, the kind that soaks through everything and turns the tracks into creeks. We pushed on because we were committed at that point, but we were making terrible time. The boys were good sports about it, but I could see them getting tired, getting cold, and by the 3rd night we were hours behind schedule and still a fair way from our planned campsite. It was just starting to get dark when we came across the shed. It appeared out of the gloom like something out of a dream. Old corrugated iron, weathered grey, bits of rust, sitting in a small clearing about 20 metres off the track. There were no other buildings around it, no signs of recent habitation, but it had a roof and 4 walls, and that, in that point of time, was all that mattered. The door was unlocked. Actually, there wasn't much of a latch left on it at all, and inside it was completely empty. No tools, no furniture, nothing, just bare dirt floor and those corrugated iron walls. But it was dry, and it was shelter, and we were all exhausted. So the other teacher and I made the call. We'd bunk here for the night instead of pushing on in the dark and the rain to reach our planned campsite. The boys were relieved, I could tell. We set up our sleeping bags on the dirt floor, had a cold meal, and settled down for the night. I'll never forget that sound, the rain drumming on that iron roof. It should have been soothing. Instead, it felt oppressive, like we were trapped inside a drum. The boys dropped off quickly enough. Teenage boys can sleep anywhere if they're tired. But I was lying there in the dark, listening to the rain, when I heard footsteps outside. Not running, not hurried, just steady, deliberate footsteps walking around the perimeter of the shed. I thought maybe it was a hiker, someone else caught out by the weather. I was about to call out when something stopped me. Some instinct. I did a head count instead. In the dim light from my torch, I counted all 8 boys. Both of us teachers, everyone was there, everyone was inside. But the footsteps kept circling, around and around the shed. And then they stopped. Right outside the wall nearest to me, complete silence except for the rain. And then another sound started. A worse sound. Something was dragging a stick across the corrugated iron. Slow, deliberate, working their way along the wall. And they were whistling. Not a song, not anything recognisable, just this tuneless, mindless whistling that went on as the stick scraped along the iron. By this point, every boy was awake. I could hear their breathing, quick and shallow. No one said a word. We all just lay there in the dark, listening to that stick scraping and that awful whistling. Then it started banging on the walls, hard enough to make the whole structure shake. The boys started to panic. I looked around the room. They were terrified. Hell, I was terrified. The other teacher was clutching his torch like it was a weapon. This went on for what seemed like 10 minutes, maybe longer, but time does strange things when you're that frightened. The circling, the scraping, the banging, and always the whistling. And then it stopped. Just stopped. Complete silence. We waited, listening. The rain had eased off to a drizzle. And then an axe head punched through the corrugated iron wall right above where I'd been laying. Just appeared through the metal like it was paper. I heard it being pulled back out, the scrape of metal on metal. Footsteps walking away, getting fainter. And then nothing. We didn't move for hours. No one slept. We just lay there, staring at the hole in the wall, waiting for dawn. When first light came, I went outside to look. The ground around the shed was covered by footprints. But disturbingly, they didn't seem like they were made with boots. You could see the individual toes in some of them. Whoever had been torturing us had bare feet. And for some reason, this is the detail that's just stuck with me for years. We packed up and got out of there. Made it to the pickup point by late afternoon. The boys never talked about it much after. Well, at least not to me or the other teacher. I think they were trying to convince themselves that it hadn't happened. But I know it did. Years later, I went onto a few internet forums to see if anyone else had had strange experiences up there. People were talking about a stranger known as the Button Man. That's what they call him, a mysterious figure people report seeing up there in the high country. I've wondered if it was him, terrifying us for no real purpose and leaving no trace. But I just don't know. I don't know what it was. But what I do know is this. I've been hiking in those mountains for decades, and I've never felt comfortable camping off trail since that night. And I've never ever whistled while I'm out there. Some things, some people, you just don't invite. Story 2. The Séance, as told by Ben Davey, spiritualist. I've studied spiritualism and theosophy for most of my adult life. I've attended dozens of séances, read every text I could find on mediumship and communication with the departed. I thought I understood the veil between this world and the next, but nothing prepared me for what happened in that little weatherboard cottage in Guyra on that April night in 1921. The whole town was in uproar. The Bowen family had been terrorised for weeks by phenomena that defied explanation. Stones thrown from nowhere, tremendous banging that shook the house to its foundations. Windows smashed despite police cordons surrounding the property. Dozens of armed men had surrounded that cottage night after night, and not one of them had caught anyone in the act. The police were at their wits' end. The sergeant had suffered a breakdown. The government had sent detectives from Sydney. Even Harry Moores, a personal friend of Arthur Conan Doyle himself, had investigated and declared himself baffled. I arrived at the cottage in late April. The phenomena was still occurring, though they'd become less violent. But the family was clearly exhausted. Mrs. Bowen looked like she'd aged 10 years in a month. Mr. Bowen was grim and silent, and young Minnie. Minnie was 12 years old, thin and dark, with these peculiar eyes that seemed to look right through you. The phenomena seemed to centre around her, though no one could prove she was causing them. I'd been studying the case from afar, reading the newspaper reports, and something had struck me. I'd learned that Mrs. Bowen's daughter May, Minnie's half-sister, had died about 3 months before the disturbances began. In my studies I'd seen this pattern before, sometimes when the departed are trying to communicate and can't make themselves heard. They resort to more forceful methods. Poltergeist activity, you might call it. Physical manifestations. Particularly if there's a young person in the household who might serve as an unwitting medium. And so I proposed a séance. Mr. and Mrs. Bowen were reluctant at first. They were God-fearing people, not given to dabbling in spiritualism. But they were desperate, and they agreed. We gathered that evening in the main room of the cottage. Just the family, myself, and one of the police constables who'd been assigned to the case. We lit a single candle and placed it in the centre of the table. I asked everyone to place their hands flat on the table, not touching, and to clear their minds of expectation. Minnie sat directly across from me, those dark eyes watching me in the candlelight. I began the invocation, asked if any spirits present wished to communicate, asked if May was there. The knock came from inside the wall behind Minnie, not violent like previous manifestations had been, deliberate, measured, once. I turned to Minnie. "Can you ask if it's your sister May?" I said. Minnie shook her head. "I can't speak to my sister, she's dead." I kept my voice gentle. "Speak, dear, even if your sister can't speak. she might knock again. It came almost immediately. Mrs. Bowen gasped. Her hands were shaking on the table. We waited. 5 minutes passed. The candle flame didn't waver. There was no breeze, no movement in the room, and then Minnie's face changed. Her eyes went distant, unfocused. She crossed herself. I hadn't known the family was Catholic, and raised her hands as if in supplication. "If that's you, May," she whispered, "speak to me." What happened next? I've gone over it in my mind 1,000 times. Minnie's mouth didn't move. I was watching her face the entire time, but a voice came from her direction. Young, feminine, distant, as if speaking from very far away. The voice said,
"Tell Mother I am perfectly happy where I am. Tell her it was her prayers when I was sick that brought me here. Tell her not to worry. I'll watch over you all."
Mrs. Bowen broke down sobbing. Minnie collapsed onto the table, crying like her heart would break. The constable, a hardened man who'd served in the Great War, went pale as milk. His hands were trembling when he tried to write in his notebook. I can tell you, my hair stood up on end. I've attended séances where nothing happened, where I suspected trickery, where I wanted to believe but couldn't quite. But this was different. This was real. When we lit the lamps again, Minnie was exhausted, barely able to stand. Mrs. Bowen was still weeping, but there was something like peace in her face for the first time since I'd arrived. The phenomena stopped that night, completely. For the first time in weeks, the Bowen household was quiet. It resumed a few days later, not as violently, but it returned. And that's when they made the desperate decision to send Minnie away to her grandmother in Glen Innes, 60 kilometres distant. The phenomena followed her there. But that night, that one night after the séance, there was peace. People have asked me over the years if I think May's spirit was genuinely there or if Minnie was playing an elaborate game. Some even suggested she was a ventriloquist, that she'd been throwing her voice all along. I can only tell you what I experienced. I've been a student of spiritualism for my entire adult life. I've seen frauds, and I've seen genuine mediums, and what I witnessed in the cottage in Guyra was no parlour trick. Whether it was May's spirit trying to bring comfort to her grieving mother, or some other force using Minnie as a conduit, I cannot say, but something crossed the veil that night. Something reached through from the other side, and when it did, I understood why people throughout history have been both fascinated and terrified by the prospect of communication with the dead. Because when it happens, when it truly happens, it changes you. I left Guyra the next day. The family thanked me for bringing them that one night of peace. But I could see even then, in Minnie's eyes, that she knew something had changed. That she'd been touched by something beyond normal experience. She died many years later, hit by a car on a road outside of Armidale. And I still wonder, if May kept her promise, if she really did watch over them all. Some mysteries, I've learned, aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to remind us that the world is stranger and far more wonderful than we can possibly imagine. Story 3. The Pilliga Horror, as told by Bongo. They tell me I should talk about it. The doctors here at Happy Days Stays Retreat. They say it might help, getting it out, putting it into words. But I don't know. Talking about it makes it more real. If I just kept quiet, maybe I can convince myself it was all in my head. But it wasn't. God help me, it wasn't. This happened back in 1978. I was doing long-haul driving. I used to pick up new vehicles from Maloney and drive them wherever they needed to go. Good money, quiet work, it suited me. This particular run, I was bringing a car from Maloney heading toward Narrabri. It was a simple job, but somehow I missed the turn-off out of Narrabri. Don't ask me how. I'd done the route before, knew it well enough. But I was tired, and the light was fading. And suddenly I was on this road I didn't recognise. The Guyra Highway, I learned later. It cuts right through the Pilliga Scrub. About halfway along I started getting concerned. The fuel gauge was dropping fast. Faster than it should have been. And the light was fading. That peculiar quality of dusk you get in the scrub where everything goes grey and the trees start to look like they're moving when they're not. It was then when I saw a vehicle ahead. A telecom van it turned out to be. I flagged him down. The bloke who got out looked at me, looked at my fuel gauge and just shook his head. Well, you're about equal distance from here to Narrabri, or back to where you came from, he said. But it won't matter much anyway. I told him I'd never make it in either direction and asked if he could ring the NRMA when he got to Narrabri, get someone to bring out some fuel. He looked at me strange. You won't get anyone to come out here after dark, he said. He didn't explain why. He just got back in his van and drove off, leaving me there with the tank running on fumes and the sun going down. I tried to make it as far as I could on what fuel I had left. Got another few kilometres before the engine died completely. Just me and the Land Cruiser and the Pilliga Scrub going dark around me. I locked the doors. I don't know why. Instinct, I suppose. The telecom's bloke's words had spooked me. Won't get anyone to come out here after dark. Like he knew something. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. The scrub at night, it's not quite like you'd think. It's full of sounds. Things moving, things calling out. And the trees. The trees out there are weird, twisted things that look like they're watching you. At around 3 or 4 in the morning, I was sitting there in the dark when I saw lights. Not headlights, not anything normal. These were weird, dancing lights moving through the scrub. Greens and blues and colours I don't even have names for. They were doing patterns, moving in ways lights shouldn't move. And then I saw it through the window. I can't describe it properly. Everything about it was wrong. The shape of it, the way it moved, the way it looked at me through the glass with these eyes that were too big and too knowing and too hungry. It grabbed the door handle. I heard the metal groan and then it just ripped the door clean off the hinges like it was made out of cardboard. This thing grabbed hold of me. Its hands were cold and hard and not shaped right. 3 fingers, I think, but I couldn't tell because I was screaming and trying to get away, and it was dragging me out into the scrub. It took me through the trees. I don't know how far. Could have been metres, could have been kilometres. Time went strange. Reality went strange. Everything was just wrong. And then we were at this place, this humpy, this shelter made of bark and branches, and I saw it had a collection. Trophies. Pale, thin, legs hanging up. Dozens of them. Human legs. Old ones, new ones, all dried out like jerky. I don't remember much after that. I think I passed out. Maybe my mind just shut down because it couldn't process what I was seeing. The doctors say trauma does that sometimes. But the next thing I knew, it was morning and I was lying on the side of the road. A timber truck picked me up, took me to Coonabarabran. They tried to help, but I was not making any sense. I couldn't stop talking about the thing in the Pilliga, the lights, the legs. They brought me here to Happy Days Stays Retreat. That's what they call it, but we all know what it is. It's where they put people who've seen things they shouldn't see, know things they shouldn't know. And I've been here ever since, 40-something years now. Some days are better than others. Some days I can convince myself it was a hallucination, exhaustion, dehydration. They tell me the Pilliga princess story. Tell me I'm not the only one who's seen strange things out there in that scrub. Lights, creatures, apparitions, things that don't make sense. It doesn't help much knowing that other people have seen things. Doesn't make it any better, it just means that there's more of us who know the truth. The world isn't what they tell you it is. There are things out there in the dark, in the lonely places, that don't care about rules or understanding. Things that have been there longer than we have. Just waiting. People sometimes ask me why I don't leave. After all these years, I could probably walk out of here if I really wanted to. But where would I go? Back out there? Back to the highways and the scrub and the dark? Nah, I'm safer here. We're all safer here. Because the thing is, I know it's still out there, still in the Pilliga, still collecting its trophies, still waiting for the next set of thin, bow-legged, knock-kneed legs to come driving down that highway after dark. And sometimes late at night, I wake up and I can still feel those cold, wrong hands on my shoulders. I can still hear it calling. So there you go, folks. 3 witness accounts from 3 different cases that we've covered here on Strewth. I hope you enjoyed the episode this evening. I'd love to know if this format was something that you want to hear more of in the future. Flick me an email, strewthpodcast@gmail.com, or find me on any of the socials. I hope you have a great festive season, however you choose to celebrate it. And just want to thank you again for all of the support and listening throughout the year. We won't be taking any time off. There'll be another episode next week, so don't worry, don't panic. Got you covered over the holidays. But if you'd like to send me a Christmas present, all I'd love for you to do is just share the podcast with a friend. Maybe hit subscribe if you haven't already, and a comment would always be wonderful too. iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd really appreciate it. So until next week, I hope you have an opportunity to share some spooky stories with your loved ones and scare the life out of them this Christmas Eve. Thanks for listening.